Welcome everyone. I am Papori Bora, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, JDSC College, Bokakhat. Today, the topic of my presentation is tax planning. So the objectives of today's presentation is introduction, meaning of tax planning, differences between tax planning and tax avoidance, tax planning and tax evasion, tax avoidance and tax evasion, and the references that are through which I have made this presentation. So let us start with the introduction. Tax planning involves a way in which an assessee or a taxpayer minimizes the tax liability legitimately. There are several areas under the Income Tax Act 1961, such as allowances, exemptions, rebates, etc., by which one can reduce the tax liability either by claiming or optimally utilizing the same. By minimizing the tax liability, an assessee can save money for future investment, growth, or expenses, etc. So, before an assessee goes for tax planning, it is very important to understand the meaning of the term tax planning, tax evasion, or tax avoidance. So, where from this tax planning comes? Actually, tax planning is a combination of two terms, that is, tax and planning. Tax is a financial charge or any other levy imposed on individual or a legal entity in pursuant to legislative authority, whereas planning means thinking before doing. Tax planning enables you to reduce your tax liability to minimum. Efficient tax planning, you can say that it ensures the amount of tax due will be paid in a timely manner, and as a whole, efficient tax planning allows a taxpayer to make the best use of tax exemptions, deductions, and benefits to minimize the tax liability. So, tax planning is not a device to reduce the tax burden. In fact, it helps a taxpayer to invest in government securities. As a result, the savings in tax helps the government to mobilize the funds by way of investment. By tax planning, the government is equally benefited. The Supreme Court in one case observed that tax planning may be legitimate provided that it is within the framework of law. As in the previous slide, I have already explained that in order to plan your tax, you should aware of the terminologies tax planning, tax avoidance, or tax evasion. So from these differences, you will be clear that what is tax planning or what is tax avoidance or what is tax evasion. First difference is between tax planning and tax avoidance. So in tax planning, it is done by staying within the four corners of law. So when you are planning something, in order to reduce your tax, that must be within the four corners of law, means within the provisions of Income Tax Act 1961. Whereas tax avoidance, in case of tax avoidance, it is done by exploiting the loopholes of the law. Second, tax planning involves fair obedience of law. On the other hand, tax avoidance involves foul play of law. Third, tax planning is illegal and acceptable by judiciary. On the other hand, tax avoidance is illegal and unethical and is prohibited. In tax planning, the transactions are real and natural, whereas in tax avoidance, the transactions are fabricated artificially. Tax planning is long run and dependable, but tax avoidance is short run and not dependable. So the next difference is between tax planning and tax evasion. Tax planning already explained before. Again, I'm giving some other points regarding tax planning and tax evasion. Tax planning is done by availing the minimum benefits of various deductions, exemptions, rebates, reliefs, etc. provided under the Income Tax Act 1961. Whereas tax evasion is done either by showing lesser income than actual or by hiding the very source of income. Tax planning involves fair obedience of law. In the previous slide also I have told you. Whereas tax evasion is a willful disobedience of law and involves an element of deceit. Tax planning is legal and acceptable by judiciary. In the previous slide, same thing is written. Whereas tax evasion is also considered as illegal and unethical and is prohibited as in case of tax avoidance. Next is tax planning. It is based on the principle of disclosure, whereas in case of tax evasion, it involves hiding the facts regarding income and expenditures. Last, it is deliberate. It is means tax planning is a deliberate creation of law for wealth generation through encouraged savings and investment, whereas tax evasion is a white-collar crime and is seen as an offense. So, the last difference is between tax avoidance and tax evasion. As already explained that tax planning is what. So now here comes the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. So tax avoidance, an act of minimizing tax liability by locating some weaknesses of law, whereas in case of tax evasion, it is an act of minimizing the tax liability either by showing lesser income than actual or by hiding the very source of income. Tax avoidance, it is within the framework of law, but it is against the basic intent of the legislative provisions. Whereas tax evasion, it is the gross violation and disrespect of law. Tax avoidance, it can be curbed by introducing anti-violence provisions of clubbing provisions, whereas tax evasion, it can be curbed by implementing the law effectively. So these are the differences between the three terminologies: tax planning, tax avoidance, and tax evasion. So from these differences, it is very clear that tax planning is legal and you can reduce the tax burden by claiming the different deductions, rebates, reliefs, etc., which comes under the Income Tax Act 1961. But tax avoidance and tax evasion is not legal and is not ethical, because in both the cases you are hiding the source of income or you are manipulating your income. So as a result of which you have to pay the less tax than the actual. So it is considered that tax planning is legal and tax avoidance and tax evasion both are illegal and unethical. So from this presentation, I have given just a brief knowledge about tax planning and what is tax avoidance and what is tax evasion. So that's all from my side. Thank you.